Hey everybody. So with this next video, just a few more terms to get you more familiar with the different parts of the brain. And with that said, let's jump right into the cerebrum. So we mentioned the cerebrum in the last video. It's the top 80 or so percent of your brain. It's the part we generally think of when we hear the brain. With that said, the cerebrum is broken down into four parts. These are some parts you may have heard before. We have the frontal cortex, or the frontal lobe. We have the parietal lobe, we have the temporal lobe, and we have the occipital lobe. Where are they found? The orange part is the frontal lobe. This is located in the very front part of the brain. The parietal lobe is a little more central to the brain, but more on top. Temporal lobe is right about where your temples are. And then your occipital lobe is located in the back. Keep in mind, we have four lobes to the cerebrum of the brain. We're just talking about the cerebrum. And again, there are two sides to each of these structures because, as we see here again, we have a right and left side of the brain. So, really important to think about because if we're talking about one section of the brain, it might be a little different on the other side. Something to think about. As we continue away from the cerebrum, now we're going to talk about the cerebellum. So if you need to pause and think about it for a second, take your time. We're moving to a separate part of the brain. Cerebellum time. This is part number 2 of the brain. If you look where my mouse is, where I'm tracing, this is all cerebrum up top. The cerebellum is just below it. It is inferior and posterior to the cerebellum, meaning it is behind it, so it's in the back part, but also below the brain, or the cerebrum, all part of the brain, right? So with that said, that's where it's located. We'll talk more about what the functions are later on. And then lastly, the brainstem, which is the third part, and you can see it right here. It's at the base of the brain, and there's a whole bunch of letters on here. We'll talk about what each of these parts of the brainstem are later, but it's important to know that the brainstem is made of multiple components. Thalamus, hypothalamus, midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. These are different parts of the brain, the brainstem, and we're going to talk about those in more detail. So use this slide to help you better understand the 3 major landmarks of the brain and the little components that make them up, as well as where they're located. If you have any questions, please let me know.